This is the story of a mom called Karishma. Her great-grandmother was raised in extreme poverty with a pattern of disciplining kids with heavy-handed punishment. It was ingrained in the family and the society at large at that time to use physical violence to keep children in line. But since the great-grandmother was beaten, that was how she raised her daughter. And her daughter, Karishma's own grandmother, hit her own daughter, Karishma's mother. Now Karishma's mother also hit Karishma. But when Karishma grew up, got married and became pregnant, she found herself conflicted about physical punishment. Let's find out if she broke the intergenerational cycle of punishment. Namaskar parents, I'm Dr. Meghna, the therapist mommy. I'm a clinical psychologist and parenting educator. And today, I'm sharing the story of all those brave moms and dads who are cycle breakers, who have endured intergenerational trauma in their childhood but refused to pass it on to their kids. Intergenerational trauma is trauma that is passed on from one generation to another in a repetitive way. What kind of trauma? Trauma could be the result of early adverse events such as child abuse, parental incarceration or divorce, substance abuse, poverty, or natural disasters. It is when exposure to these early adverse events affects people so profoundly that future generations may be impacted as well that we talk about generational or intergenerational trauma. Common symptoms of intergenerational trauma include emotional dysregulation, numbing or detachment from thoughts and behaviors and memories, as well as sleep disturbances, addictions, hyperarousal and hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts and memories, dissociation, depersonalization, and derealization. An example of this is the atrocities that were committed during partition of India in 1947. Lakhs of families faced trauma: murder, rape, abrupt and forced relocation, loss of social rootedness, and exposure to social unrest. The strands of that trauma are still found in generations after that. How? Trauma often changes how our genes function. This is known as epigenetic change. But the transmission of trauma is also influenced by cultural and psychological factors. Kids whose parents experienced trauma are more likely to grow up with a parent who's unstable, emotionally distant, or anxious, and these parenting behaviors may also contribute to trauma that is passed down to another generation. Does all of this sound scary? Like we have no control over how we may be impacted by what our grandparents or great-grandparents went through? Well, there is hope. Remember the story of Karishma? When she got pregnant, she had to ask herself if she thought it was healthy to discipline her child using the same methods that she was subjected to as a child. Although she was taught, just like her mom was taught by her mom, that physical punishment was the way to get kids to listen to you, to raise respectful and responsible children, Karishma never felt comfortable subjecting her child to similar methods. But she realized just how deep her trauma was when her husband raised his voice at the kids for misbehaving. Karishma started having severe panic attacks, seemingly out of the blue. When she came to me for therapy, we were able to get to the root of her anxiety. It was because of the intergenerational trauma that she had experienced. That was when Karishma decided to stop this cycle. She learned that as an adult, she had the power to teach her children skills that her parents couldn't teach her. Like what to do when you feel angry or upset, what to do when your child is throwing a tantrum. She learned conscious parenting. She learned how impacted she was by the way she was raised, how her mother's upbringing was still wired within her. She learned how she still would think and feel and behave in ways that reflected this wiring and how this impacted her own parenting. She also learned in therapy to forgive her mother. She knew in her heart that her mom did her best and loved her dearly, but she simply did not have the support. Her mother simply did not have the tools to put labels on the trauma that she had experienced as a child herself. Karishma broke the intergenerational trauma by not beating her child. Here are 5 other ways in which you can break this generational trauma. 1. If your parents dismissed your emotions, but you try to understand your child's emotions. 2. If your parents were rigid and inflexible, but you understand your children as they are. 3. If your parents yelled at you, but you try to have conversations instead. 4. If your parents left you alone with your emotions or put you down, but you help your children process theirs. And fifth, if your parents made you responsible for their emotions, but you understand your children are not responsible for yours. For our children, we need to provide them with a world where they feel safe and cared for. Here are 5 ways on how to break the cycle of intergenerational trauma. Open up a conversation with your parents about their lived experiences and how they coped. Notice any embedded patterns or attitudes or narratives from your family that you continue to portray. Talk through these areas with a trusted friend or a family member, or even better, a therapist, and consider an alternative way of coping or communicating. Cultivate a sense of empathy and compassion for your family and the struggles they endured. Despite their flaws, many of our ancestors worked hard so that we could have a better life. This too should be celebrated and embraced. And finally, recreate a new narrative that you want your children to embody and believe about their family, themselves, and the world. You don't have to pass the trauma that you went through to your children. You can be a cycle breaker, my dear brave parents. This is the Therapist Mommy signing off.